Last week, on the 17th, a senior Chinese diplomat paid a visit to North Korea as a special envoy of President Xi Jinping. Also, North Korea has not staged any provocative act for more than 2 months now, furthering speculation that the regime may be open to the discussion on its nuclear program. Yet, tension still remains between the United States and North Korea. The United States is demanding that the North should stop and discontinue its nuclear development. And President Trump redesignated the North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism after 9 years. And North Korea is insisting on the withdrawal of the sanctions first. After respective summits with the United States and South Korea, China is playing a mediating role. What message did Xi Jinping send to the North through his special envoy, and how will it affect the Korean Peninsula? It's up next on this week's Peninsula 24. For today's discussion, we are joined by two experts in the studio. To my left, we have a guest, Dr. James Kim, a research fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Kim, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And as always, in the studio with me, Dr. Kim Chang-su. Dr. Kim, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me on again. Thank you.
Okay, so quickly after Song Tao, who is a special envoy of President Xi Jinping, and when he returned to China, President Trump redesignated North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism.
Today, the United States is designating North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism.
Well, why now? I mean, there was saying that he was going to redesignate it like on 15th, I guess, and when there's a big major announcement, North Korea, but he didn't do it.
The State Department was pushing very hard on this issue of reopening talks with North Korea, and they were looking for signs from North Korea about their willingness to come out and engage with the American counterparts. And so, in many ways, even though there might have been plans and preparations to make this announcement before, because of lack of resources, along with the State Department push for a desire to re-engage with the North Koreans, and also to wait and see whether the Chinese move has any impact. I think a combination of these factors led President Trump to delay his announcement, and eventually we got to see what we were going to see anyways, but and in many ways this wasn't any surprise. But I think it was several factors that played into this from the U.S.'s standpoint.
I was looking into the timing of this announcement of the restatement of North Korea to the list of state sponsor of terrorism, including Iran, Syria, and Sudan. This is only 4 countries on the list. This is very interesting because we were maybe speculating there was something going on between Xi Jinping and Mr. Trump about how they're going to effectively kind of put pressure on the Kim Jong-un regime. But after Song Tao came back from Beijing, Pyongyang rather, and maybe there was no tangible and visible signs that he didn't meet with Kim Jong-un himself, and there was no tangible outcomes of any major achievement from them. I think this might have triggered why Mr. Trump has delayed 5 days to announce the reinstatement of the North Korea to the list. I think he said that it's maybe he was quite disappointed. Maybe he was expecting something to come out of this, Song Tao's meeting with the Kim Jong potential meeting, but it didn't realize. And he was disappointed. And as he said, Mr. Trump said, this is a time to put extra sanctions on North Korea again, so that they really feel that we really mean business. Okay, and it's not just the United States, but China also as well, and including the whole international community, that we really want to abandon this kind of terrorism and also kind of WMDs. I think this is a very strong message. On the one hand, it's a kind of disappointment on the part of the United States and also China, but this is a kind of something that we want the Kim Jong-un leadership to realize that we really want to talk, but before that you have to do this and this and that.
Well, I mean, there was high expectation, as a matter of fact, when Song Tao visited North Korea. Well, people expected that he probably get to meet Kim Jong-un. It didn't happen, and right after he returned to China, there was this, President Trump's statement of redesignating North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism. Does it all mean that China didn't really meet the conditions North Korea wants before it goes to the negotiation table, or is it like that China actually lost its influence over North Korea, if there was any?
I don't think it is really almost impossible for the North Korean leadership to meet the conditions laid out by the United States and China, because that is the abrogation of the nuclear missile programs, and so it is almost impossible for the leadership to even consider it right now. And look at a major spirit. That was a very interesting expression by the Chinese newspapers. He delivered what was the main spirit and achievement of CPC, the 19th CPC Congress. So this is not something that can interest North Korean leadership, because they are not interested in listening to what kind of achievements you made in China. What they were actually interested in is how they're going to help North Korea from this kind of very difficult moments. But what Mr. Song Tao did was very different from what the Pyongyang's sort of expectations. That's why Kim Jong-un, for various other reasons as well, he really didn't want to meet Song Tao this time. So this is all speculative.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting question that we could ask is, would this high-level party visit have happened regardless of whether North Korea has conducted a sixth nuclear test and the missile test? And I think I would argue that yes, because you've seen similar patterns in 2012 and 2007. At each point, and when the Party Congress did happen, Chinese high-level party visit did occur. So it's not any surprise that this visit happened when it did. But there was an added hope or expectation about what this meeting might produce, given the timing, given that there was a sixth nuclear test and these multiple missile launches, that this issue would come to the fore in the discussion. And I think that North Korea did play up to the expectation to some extent by sending Choi Ryong-hae to meet with him, and Lee Soo-young also met with Song Tao. So it was as though, of course, Kim Jong-un wasn't there at the meeting as the head of the party. Nonetheless, I think in many ways, Song Tao is the head of international affairs for the Communist Party, and they sent the relevant, matching level officials from the North Korean Communist Party. But it didn't quite result in the kind of outcome that maybe President Trump wanted. President Trump tweeted out when this meeting happened that this is a big move, that he expected big results from this. But obviously, again, he was disappointed. And I think Dr. Kim pointed out there could be many reasons why North Korea didn't want to talk about the nuclear issue. It could be that they're having some internal difficulties with the development of the program, or it could simply be that they're not willing to negotiate on this issue yet. What that means is that we're in for some difficult time ahead if the United States response to that is maximum pressure until North Korea engages. We're going to see not only more sanctions, but there could be more threats. Rhetoric could get hotter. There could be some deployments that may signal the U.S. desire to potentially even strong-arm North Korea, meaning that tensions can potentially go up. But there's a flip side to this, is that the U.S. also wants to leave open the door for possibility of engagement and talk.
No, we still hope for diplomacy. Again, this just continues to tighten the pressure on the Kim regime, all with an intention to have him understand this is only going to get worse until you're ready to come and talk.
We still hope for diplomacy.
And so the question here is whether these pressures that the U.S. is adding on to the North Korean shoulders lead the North Korean leadership to come out and engage. Or does this have the opposite effect of getting North Koreans to really hunker down and try to fight through these pressures and eventually complete the development of their nuclear program. In which case, then, you know, everybody has a very difficult choice to make. Do we want to negotiate with the North Koreans, recognizing them as a nuclear state, or do we want to negotiate with the North Koreans without recognizing them as a nuclear state, but de facto nuclear state? Or do we want to not negotiate with them at all and continue on this track of deterrence and strengthening deterrence, much like, you know, it's a mini version of the Cold War that we saw before the Soviet Union collapsed. Which means that we're going to be living under tense times, but you know, it's a time where we're going to have to continue to build our defensive capabilities and arms to hedge against the North Korean nuclear threat.
Well, okay, so having said that, well, let's get some opinions from our American expert. We have Ralph Cossas on the line. He is the president of the Pacific Forum of CSIS. Hello, Ralph Cossas. It's really nice to have you on the show.
My pleasure. Aloha.
So there was a rumor that U.S. is kind of questing for the talk and dialogue with North Korea in recent days, and North Korea has been halting its testing the missiles and also the nuclear test. So it's almost 2 months now. Do you think this really is a signal for dialogue? And if the dialogue happens, is North Korea and also the United States ready for the talk?
Well, I think both are ready for talks. The question is, what are they ready to talk about? The U.S. wants to talk about denuclearization. The DPRK wants to talk about being recognized as a nuclear weapon state. So the real problem is not are they willing to talk, but what are they willing to talk about? I think it's been encouraging that there's been a lull in missile activity for the last 60 days. Whether that's a signal or not is very hard to tell. It could have been that the North Koreans were planning a new nuclear test, but the collapse of the mountain has now changed that. So we'll have to wait and see. But the key is really what they're willing to talk about, not if they're willing to talk.
Okay. Secretary of Defense Mattis said there will be an opportunity for talks for North if North Korea stops testing, developing, and doesn't export weapons. Do you think North Korea will accept these conditions? And if they reject, and how the affect the relationship between North Korea and the United States?
Yeah, I think the North might be willing to accept 2 out of 3. The North has said that they are not proliferating, so the idea about not exporting weapons, they've claimed that they're for their own defense. So that's something that we could readily agree on. Whether they are cheating or not is another story, but at least they've claimed they weren't. So that's an easy precondition. The real key is the second point, the programs. Are they willing to halt the programs? How would we know? That would require inspection. It would require intrusive inspection, and that's where talks have broken down in the past. And I don't think they're prepared to give up the programs, even if they might be prepared to give up testing once they've satisfied their testing objectives. If they agree to 2 out of 3, should we accept that? I don't think we should. I don't think that's good enough, but others might disagree. If that doesn't occur, then we're right back to where we are right now, which is everybody sending threats to everyone else. But at the end of the day, it's business as usual.
Well, if in the case they reject the offer, then is there another way to open the dialogue between the two countries?
I think there are a number of ways. Of course, the easiest way to open dialogue with them is to give them what they want. They would like to have a peace treaty with the United States that cuts South Korea out of the process. I don't think we'll do that. I certainly hope we wouldn't do that. That would be one way of getting them to talk. But obviously, you know, we're not going to do that. If the Chinese and the Russians and others are prepared to really tightly enforce sanctions and force the North Koreans to make a choice between economic development and nuclear program, that might be another way to get them to talk. But that requires the Chinese and the Russians to be much more forthcoming than they have been thus far. They're now claiming that they're going to do that, but I think that remains to be seen.
I see. Thank you very much, Mr. Cossas. That was Ralph Cossas, president of the Pacific Forum at CSIS in Honolulu. So what do you think about his opinion?
I think he's right, and Ralph he's a really expert on these matters for the last 30 years, and I believe one of the things he was implying too through this Skype was maybe the kind of freeze as opposed to the denuclearization, because many people in South Korea and the United States are talking about how we're going to effectively deal with North Korean issues. And China also, they're talking about, because denuclearization is a good thing eventually, but this is something very remote and we can achieve overnight. So instead, they're suggesting that maybe we have to think about very seriously the freeze for freeze. This is a Chinese version as well. I think this is reiterated at the Song Tao's visit to North Korea, to China and North Korea this time. And this is something cannot be accepted by the Chinese North Korean leadership. So the freeze for freeze has been pretty much kind of introduced and very much strongly advocated by some of the experts in the United States. But as you know, Trump administration and
he said flat no.
So this is something we can accept, because freeze versus freeze is something we can accept. But North Korea might be interested in this kind of idea, but for various reasons, technical reasons and diplomatic reasons, we just cannot accept this kind of a proposal. And I think that's why we see some kind of discrepancy between Chinese, for example, on the one hand, and the United States. But also, I think this problem is something we have to really think about. And maybe there was a time where we're going to seriously give kind of second thought about the freeze. What's the utility of freeze for the moment, as opposed to the eventual denuclearization of the North Korea?
So what do you think? A freeze for freeze. Is it possible?
I think there's a roadmap that President Moon suggested, which was essentially that this would be a stage process that would eventually work towards denuclearization.
Right.
And that immediately the thing that the United States and South Korea could work with the North Koreans on is this issue of freeze. And whether that be a freeze of the nuclear program, for a freeze of the military exercises, or whether that be a freeze of a North Korean nuclear program with a freeze of tensions. I don't know exactly what this would amount to, but certainly I think the negotiators can work on that. Essentially, what this suggests is that this roadmap suggests is that this could be worked in stages, and that United States might be able to come on board if the eventual objective here is denuclearization. The question is whether North Korea is willing to sit down at a negotiating table with the understanding that this is a staged process that will work towards eventual denuclearization. I'm not sure if that's even possible at this point. I think North Korea is sending a signal that they're not willing to go down that road. And so we need to work out some sort of a solution to make everybody happy. And I'm not sure what the solution is at the moment.
Well, to remind you guys, Pyeongchang Winter Olympic is followed by the key resolve military joint exercise. So we'll see at that time. Well, let's talk about North Korea. So North Korea is refrained from any further nuclear provocation and missile launch. So what does it mean? Why they suddenly stopped doing it?
Well, it could be, as Dr. Kim pointed out.
But James was referring to the frequency of the missile test. That's very interesting, because they've done like over, I don't know, so many, strikes. But maybe because they have tested very important means of the delivery, IRBM and near ICBMs.
Right.
And they have really impressed us, but not to the point where we are really 100% sure that they have this kind of ICBM capability, which is very essential to the United States strategy vis-a-vis North Korea. So I don't think they have reached that stage yet. So they're making all kind of presumptions, all kind of excuses. We attend that, but we are kind of refraining from doing that for the test, in return for something concessions from Washington. But Washington really knows, because hey, they have the raw data and how exactly advanced North Korean leadership in terms of their nuclear missile capability. So let's see. Probably it's not just a diplomatic political issues, but it's a technical problems involved here. So we have to come up with a very important, very critical, trustworthy information, take military capabilities. Otherwise, all kind of assumption talks are maybe turn out to be empty, because we don't have the stock reality where they really stand in terms of capability. So freezing It sounds good, but it's, we just cannot freeze our military exercise with the United States. This is for defensive purposes, and this has been long planned, year-round plan. So there is no way that we can stop. Maybe you can consider kind of reducing the scale of the exercises in return for something to get from Pyongyang, the Pyongyang leadership. But the freezing or suspending our combined military exercises is almost impossible for the moment. For many years, many months to come.
Well, Joseph Yun, the United States Special Representative for North Korean policy, and he is also negotiator for six-party talks. He said he visited Korea on 14th, and he also said, quote, if North Korea halts nuclear missile testing for 60 days, it will be a signal the U.S. should resume the direct talks with Pyongyang, end quote. So it's more than 60 days passed. So what do you think? Is it possible?
Well, I think it's interesting that he said this in September. And I think, Dr. Kim, I'm completely on board with Dr. Kim on this, that a idea to freeze, freeze for freeze, I think is a dead end, ultimately, at the end of the day. And I think Dr. Kim also makes a good point about sort of the technical development and the stage of technical development that the North Korean missile program may be at. It's possible that they've completed their development, so they don't need any more tests. Or it's also possible that they've hit a wall in their development and that they need to, before progressing further and conducting more tests, they need to process the data that they have and engage more development of their missile capability. Another possibility, though, if you take a look at the frequency of tests over the past 5 years, between January to September, the number of tests on average per month has been about 4 to 5 times. And when you get to the month in October until December, that number goes down to under 1.
It's getting cold.
Yeah, it's getting cold. And it could be that there are technical issues having to do with testing missiles under these very cold conditions. That could be one reason why they're not testing. Second possibility is that they're diverting their resources for usage on harvest, which is another sort of theory that's out there, that military resources such as fuel and personnel are being diverted to harvesting on farms. So that's one possible explanation for why they're not testing, because all of the resources that they needed in order to conduct these tests, they're diverting to usage and harvest. It could also be that the final possibility, some intelligence officials that are suggesting that, and I'm sure Dr. Kim knows this, is that they engage in certain exercises of their own, military exercises during the winter months. And that these exercises require a lot of resources and also time and planning, and so they can't be used for testing missiles. But then, there are a whole slew of other potential reasons for why this may be. But technically speaking, if you take a look just at the way that they've been testing over the past 4 or 5 years, the number of tests during the October to December months have been relatively lower than it has been in other months. So I don't expect many tests. Maybe 1. Some years they've had 2 during the last October to December. But again, as Dr. Kim pointed out, this is not an independent observation we're looking at. This development is occurring at a particular kind of trajectory. And as development is happening over time, they might need new kinds of data, and there may be other reasons why they need to test their missile capabilities. So one assumption that we're making just by looking at the frequency is that these are independent observations, and these clearly are not. So this is just one possible hypothesis or theory that's out there about why they're not testing. Obviously, the final possibility, if Jo Yoon has his way on that, is that North Korea wants to now talk. And that's why they're not testing, because they're trying to meet the conditions under which the State Department has laid out for engaging in talks. We'll see in the coming months whether that's the case.
I think James made a very interesting hypothesis and observations. That is, if we can extrapolate from out of these assumptions, maybe toward the end of this year, maybe in December, they will really abstain from doing an extra nuclear test. Maybe in January, they may conclude the New Year's address, and before the February 15th, they're going to do something again. because they are expecting we are going to have a kind of massive combined military exercise again, key resolve exercise 4 ago. So this is a time that they're going to announce their position again. We really oppose and this kind of continued military exercise by the United States and the Republic because they are already hostile to the Republic and also they are too strong to us. So we have to really make this kind of proposal. Let's stop it or let's freeze it for the moment. And then we'll come back to the negotiating table. So their strategy is waiting until the next January or February so that they can maximum impacts on their proposal, why they are asking kind of freeze of combined military by the United States and Republic of Korea.
I see. Well, that was a really insightful discussion, and thank you, Dr. Kim, and thank you, Dr. Kim. And thank you all for staying with us. We'll be back next week with the hottest issues surrounding the Korean Peninsula. Thanks for watching.